to have Donnell Probst. She's going to help us make sense of AI and deepfakes and scams and just help us be more savvy media consumers and help our kids do the same. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Donnell is the interim executive director at the National Association for Media Literacy Education, also known as NAMELY, a national nonprofit dedicated to empowering individuals to become thoughtful consumers, creators, and sharers of information. She's been with the organization in various capacities for 10 years, before which she was a community college librarian. As the parent of an outstanding human with a disability, Donnell also worked as a special education advocate and parent educator throughout Eastern Missouri for the better part of a decade. She lives in St. Louis, Missouri, and has 3 children and 2 rescue beagles named Hans and Franz.
They're going to pump you up.
Yeah. I remember that one. That was so good on SNL.
Yes.
That's very cute. So welcome. It looks to me like the National Association for Media Literacy Education began in 1997, and that was really just when the internet was beginning. I mean, that's when we had dial-up and instant messenger, and it has changed so much. So I feel like media literacy is needed now way more than ever. What really is media literacy?
Yeah, so NAMELY defines media literacy as the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of media. So it's not necessarily an end point or an end product, but rather a process by which we consume media, create media, the way that we think about media that we're consuming. And it's all about really applying your own kind of beliefs and values and judgments to the media that you're consuming. So it's, not a point of view, it's apolitical. It's really just how we think about what we're doing with media, right? How we're sharing it, what we're going to share or not share, and really thinking about how we can kind of add positively to the information ecosystem.
What is the mission of NAMELY?
So we are really focused on helping educators, students, parents, because they are also teachers, researchers, and really just anyone who is interested in forwarding the mission of media literacy to really support them in doing that. So we're kind of the national umbrella organization. And, ideally, we want everyone to be media literate, but we really feel that in this day and age, education is the key to getting us to a better place online and with all sorts of media.
There is just so much to learn. I mean, every day I'm learning new stuff about it. It's just crazy. And I'd say let's start with AI. It's been around for a little while, but it just feels like it's gotten so big so fast just in the last 6 months or a year. How would you even explain what AI is to like a really little kid, like say a kindergartner?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to explain it to young kids is that it's really just pattern recognition, right? So it is a computer going out onto the internet, searching for information, looking for patterns, and trying to make kind of judgments and assumptions and kind of simulating a human response to things, right? So we see that being used in schools. We see it being used for good and bad. We see a lot of different ways that kind of those predictions that are trying to be made by computers are working. And, part of the problem and also the benefit is that the information that's out there is created by humans, right? And so not all information is good information. Not all information is bad information. It has some really amazing positive uses and really interesting ways that can advance the world right now. But it really is, you have to think about AI and the fact that the information it's pulling from was created by humans, and that comes with a lot of pitfalls sometimes.
Yeah. So, I mean, you really have to remember it might not be giving you the right answer. It might be giving you a skewed answer.
Yeah.
I guess it's only as good as the information that it used to train itself, right?
Right.
And if you if you do a search on your computer at school, it may or may not be the right answer. You're going to need to maybe check with a grown-up, or I
Yeah,
suppose
I mean,
it's...
and yeah, that's not necessarily different, right, than using your browser. We wouldn't necessarily go into Google the answer and choose the first thing that comes up, right?
Mhm.
We always do a little more work. We scroll, we look for different answers, we look for consistency among the answers. So if we're seeing the same answer over and over and over from multiple sources, we're, okay, this is beginning to look like maybe I can verify this across multiple places. And so AI is the same, right? Like we need to verify the information that it's providing. We need to think about, what that message is that AI is providing us. And these are all media literacy skills, right? Like we need to ask, and kids can ask this of all ages, who created this piece of AI and what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to get me to think about? Are they trying to get me to do something? Are they trying to get me to buy something? There's these things that we can teach kids at very, very young ages because kids are very savvy, right? Even at young ages. And so I think the idea that, some of these tech things are for older kids is maybe where we start to go awry, is that we need to be introducing this earlier in order to give them these skills.
Because I think a lot of this stuff is made for adults or made for teenagers, and yet little kids are getting their hands on it anyway. So they need to be aware.
Yes, and that's the hard part about devices and being online and kids in general, right? I've got 3 and they're, we have navigated, my oldest was one of the, first groups to really be using social media. And it was kind of the wild, wild west back then. She's 25 now. So, it was, 10, 15 years ago when it was first introduced, she was, out there in the chaos that was social media at that time. My youngest is now 17. And so he's kind of in the throes of it and uses it very differently than my oldest did. But these are all, things that, we know that kids, if their intention to access something, they will find a way to do that, right? Some kids don't have that, desire, but there are lots and lots of kids out there who do, and really, giving them the tools in a positive, productive way rather than seeing them go to like the deep, dark corners of the internet is, always more desirable. So.
Is there any way to tell if a photo or a piece of music or anything has been made with AI? I mean, just as for us as the consumer, like if I'm on Facebook and I see a photo, is there any way for me to tell?
I think there is. AI is getting better is part of the problem. I think we're all thinking about, if AI is this good right now, what is it going to look like in another year, 2 years, 5 years?
Yeah.
I think there are some telltale signs that we have seen over and over again that are kind of dead giveaways, right? If you see signs in an image, sometimes with AI, there won't be legible writing on the sign, or it will just be gibberish. Overly smooth skin is another kind of, telltale sign. Hands, feet, facial, things that are a little bit off. Maybe they only have 3 fingers instead of 4. Maybe there's like a disconnect between the background and the image in the foreground, and you'll see, things missing. So it's really, and it can be difficult. Sometimes you really can't tell, which is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's sort of the same thing that you would look for back when people were first starting to use Photoshop. Like some of the, like, your arm kind of doesn't quite look straight, or, something like that. But
yeah.
I mean, I went on to a site called thispersondoesnotexist.com.
Yes.
And I honestly don't know if it's real or not. Supposedly, it's pictures of people that were completely generated by AI. And every time you click it, it gives you a new person. And it looks like real people to me. Absolutely.
Yes.
1,000,000%. There's no way I would be able to figure it out. So if people want to go to that site, I mean, as far as you know, is that generated by AI?
That is generated by AI.
It's so creepy. It really, really, really looks like real people.
Yes.
So, I mean, I suppose, one thing we could do with our kids is see if we can find some images that have some of those telltale signs and just sit down with them and show them how they're a
Yes.
little bit different and what to look for. But man, it is getting really good.
Yes, it is. It's a little unsettling, but that goes back to the question, right, of thinking about how do we verify? How do, like these skills need to be honed because it's only going to get more and more difficult to identify these things. And that might be, reverse image searching, because you can find a lot of that in with stock imagery too, right? Those images aren't fake, but you can put stock imagery into Google, Lens and reverse image search that and then see that it's coming up, multiple times across the internet because many people are accessing that same image. So something like that, it's going to be more and more difficult. And I think some of the smaller things that we can look for are going to be really important, but it's only going to get, I think, more challenging.
Which again, with older kids, we'd want to point out, I mean, this is the sort of thing that could really be used in extortion or sextortion if they start chatting online with someone and revealing, oh, I really like girls with brown hair. Oh, I really like whatever. The person on the other side of the screen that they think is someone completely different than who they really are could just create an AI image based on everything that they've told them. And then your child is like, oh, I'm talking to the cutest 13-year-old girl ever.
Yeah.
Isn't this wonderful? And it's a completely AI generated image and it's somebody nefarious on the other side of the screen. So just keeping kids aware of how much information they're actually giving out.
Yes.
Not talking to strangers, period. Not chatting online, because I suppose it used to be they just used any old picture that they had stolen off the internet, but now they could just be generating an image.
Yeah.
And oh man, it's so much to think about.
It is. There is a lot.
I'm wondering about the classroom. AI is being used, in really helpful ways and in less helpful ways. I just read an article a couple of days ago from the Washington Post saying that college kids sometimes are writing out an entire essay. They did it all themselves, but they're so afraid that they're going to be flagged for generating it with AI that they then put it through an AI detector. Yeah. And if it flags and says this was written with AI, then they have to go back in and change some words to make it seem even more human. Even though they wrote the essay themselves, they're having to tweak it because a lot of teachers are using these detectors. And so it's just really, really changing the way that kids write things. And, with things like Grammarly, even, that can be really, really helpful. It can suggest ways to write a sentence. It can suggest ways to change your grammar, but then those are also getting flagged. And some kids are getting in really big trouble for using AI, even though they've used just something like Grammarly. So I guess, how do you see is a way forward for teachers to assess kids so that we don't just keep going round and round in these circles of using AI, not using it, using detectors? How can kids get assessed better in classes? How can we deal with grading in this type of world that we're living in now?
Yeah, I think these are really challenging questions, and I'm not sure that we have quite figured it out yet. I think we're still contending with the fact that this is kind of early times in this issue of AI in the classroom, and there are mixed feelings about the role. I think understanding that people are using AI, right? People are using ChatGPT in their everyday lives at work. And so there is this conundrum that we need to teach students how to use it productively, when it's appropriate to use it, when it is not appropriate to use it, right? And so I think some of the pitfalls that we're seeing are these detectors are often flagging content, especially for students who maybe English isn't their first language, because it's saying, oh, well, this phrasing is not typical for an English speaker. But if English is not your first language, you might have a different speech pattern than someone who has English as their first language. And so there's some of these things that are almost discriminatory in their detection because of the way that they've been trained. And so I think that is like a whole problem in and of itself, right? And so then when we're thinking about how are we, grading this in the classroom, I think we're in a situation where we have to pivot, right? We have to really rethink, what does education look like in an age of AI, and how can we do things that are maybe less just heavy writing, in situations like ELA classes and things like that. You're not going to be able to get away from it, but that's where the lesson has to be. This is a time when we're not using, AI and things like that, because this is, the content here is the writing itself versus if you're in a science class and you're writing a science paper, how can you effectively use this to improve what you're doing in this class? Because that is probably a skill you're going to be using in college, in your workplace, and that is something that is now a skill that's going to probably be required for some of these students moving out of, compulsory and higher education. And so I don't know that we've kind of cracked the code on this. I don't know that there's any kind of one size fits all. I know I'm hearing a lot of teachers talking about returning to more like, verbal assessments and things like that, or finding projects or things to do where they're actually showing their content knowledge versus just writing a paper about it, or, doing something that's a little easier to manipulate with AI. And so I think those are some of the changes that we're going to have to think about how we're approaching this in the classroom. But I think that's a huge lift. I think that's a very big challenge. And that's going to require a lot of training for teachers to understand what those potential changes are that they need to be making.
And you make a great point that this isn't going away. People are using it in their workplaces, and these kids are going to be using it in their workplaces. How can we teach kids to use AI as a tool and not a crutch? Like, what are some of the ways that it's really, really helpful, but maybe it doesn't do all the work for you?
Yeah, I think we can show them how to use it in productive ways, so that the default is not that we only use this to essentially plagiarize content in a classroom, right? Because that is the way that I think is like the default, and that's what everybody's talking about, right? Is how do we keep kids from cheating with AI? And I think we need to reframe that narrative and talk about what are the positive ways that we can use this? How can we effectively show them, here's, a really great way to use this as a brainstorming tool, or to help refine your outline for a paper, or, how can we use it to think about this really complex topic, or even how can we use it to learn about how AI works? And see, how does a human response change, compare to an AI response, and really use it, kind of flip it on its head, and not think about it just as something simply that we have to avoid and work against, but what are the positive ways, and reframe it for them that there are good ways to use this, and focus on that. Because I think entirely focusing on the problem with it, right, is going to just shine a light on that, is going to draw more attention to that. I think we have to address those challenges, but we also need to be thinking about the positive ways and teaching students to use it in that way.
Yeah. And I think, like, you're talking about brainstorming and stuff like that. I'm noticing just very recently, if you do a Google search, there's a portion at the top of the page. I don't know, is it Gemini, or I can't remember who owns which one. So it's like a lot of people are not even looking at what answers are coming up on Google and what articles they're being directed to. They may just go straight to that little window at the very top that's AI generated to answer your question. And so I think that absolutely goes into just regular old media literacy. Like, how would you direct kids about that? I mean, because we were sort of getting into it earlier of just even back before all of this changed recently, you're mentioning, find multiple sources, like maybe go to a trusted source. Like, I personally have started just saying, you know what, I'm going to just I'm only going to do stuff from newspapers. Like I'm going to grab stuff from New York Times, Washington Post. Like if it's a newspaper I've heard of that's been around for over 100 years, I'm like, okay, and if it's some sort of like a blog post, I'm going to see, okay, they said such and such, but have I found that 2 or 3 other places? I mean, what are some of the just general media literacy guidelines that we should be teaching kids when they're looking up information? And yeah, how does that incorporate into this brand new window at the top of the screen that's serving you up exactly what you asked for?
Yeah, I think there's so much we can do, right? So I think number one, I think trusted sources is hard because it depends who you ask what they consider to be trusted sources. And those answers vary widely. And so we're thinking about, things like how do we teach kids about what the process of journalism is? Because if they understand the process of journalism and they understand the difference between a traditional news source, so like a Thomson Reuters or a AP News feed versus a CNN or a Fox News, and what the difference is between cable news versus written news and what the different processes are that go into that. I think when we understand the creation process, which we often don't talk about, we better understand how to verify who can be trusted and who, you might need to ask some more questions about. And I don't think that there is a one size fits all because, good stories can come from sources that aren't great, and sources that are great can also sometimes publish something that's not accurate, right? So it's like we have to, I think, teach kids to slow down if they're consuming news. I think we have to teach them to go directly to sources rather than waiting for a social media algorithm to feed them news, because then the social media algorithm is deciding what they see and what they don't see. It's not them going through, a AP News, page and reading through and figuring out what interests them and what they want to learn more about and deciding what they don't want to learn more about. And then I think we have to teach them really basic skills like lateral reading, like you were talking about. If you see a story in one place, even if it is in a Reuters article, go to 2 more articles and, open up the next browser in your screen and see if you can find additional sources that have and verify that information. If you see it in a blog post, like you said, maybe that blog post isn't, somebody who's, abides by the Society of Professional Journalism ethics, but maybe they have sources that are good. You don't know. And so you want to go and verify that across multiple sources. And then I think we need to ask them to ask questions. So, who wrote this and what is their background? What is their expertise? What is their authority? Are they being paid? Who's paying them? How might that change what they're reporting, what they're saying, or maybe not saying?
Yeah.
And, what are they wanting me to think? How is this making me feel? Am I getting very upset by this? Is it something that's sensationalized and that's designed to cause outrage within myself? I always say that my favorite kind of news is the boring news, right? Like straight news shouldn't outrage you. As a general rule of thumb, it should just be very factual reporting. And so if there is sensational language and headlines and things like that, you might need to take a step back and say, is this the whole story, or is this something that has been kind of embellished in order to create a response to get me to think or feel or do something in a certain way? So I think, and that's just news, right? Like then you're talking about movies and how people are represented and how that makes them look at the community around them. So is this, an accurate portrayal of this community or this type of person? And who created this? Was the person who this is portraying involved in the creation of this so that it's authentic? Or was this created by somebody totally different? And we see how that impacts our community. I have a daughter who's on the autism spectrum. And, when she was younger, every portrayal of people with autism was very, very kind of singular, right? It was a boy. They were had horrible social skills. They didn't have any friends. They were very awkward, had very repetitive behaviors. And that is such like a narrow part of the spectrum. And and it really shaped how people saw people with autism for a long time. And we're finally starting to see some more variations of that in media, but media does have the power to really change how we think about our society and people around us.
I mean, that's a great question of just even media literacy that, say, for example, I was learning in college a gajillion years ago. You make a great point of it could be a music video, it could be a movie, it could be a song, it could be an exhibit at a museum. Just really important, like you said, to think who's making this, why, like how are they portraying, is this sexist? Is this anti-LGBT plus? Is it racist? Is it classist? Just teaching kids to notice all of those things. I mean, even, I've just been noticing even recently just a small thing of like, my husband and I have been watching all the Mission Impossible movies so that we're ready for the one that's coming out. And I noticed there's one woman pretty much in the entire first Mission Impossible movie. And they just got way, way better as they went on of including far more female characters. And that's just a tiny thing you could point out to your kids of like, how many women are in this movie? How many men are in this movie? Are we noticing people from different backgrounds? Like, but I think, you're really on it with who made this and why.
Yeah.
Like, especially if this is an ad. Like, of course they're saying this is the best bubble gum on earth. They want you to buy it. Like,
yes.
Just really, because I think little kids just don't understand the concept of commercials. And that like commercials and news are very different things. And also that we're like on things like Instagram and Twitter, they're very mixed in, teaching kids that like this looks like a post, but at the top in a tiny little writing, it'll say sponsored and explaining like, what does that mean? What does sponsored mean? And why are they trying to make it look like all of your other posts?
Yes. These are really important points. And I think it really goes to show, there's some countries out there that have done a much better job than we have done about making sure that kids' kind of online experience is more protected. You might not be able to advertise, things that are unhealthy for kids directly to kids, right? Like there's other countries that have regulated these types of things and we have not. And so I think that's where, kind of this, we consider media literacy a shared responsibility, right? So we need the buy-in of tech companies to fix this. They're not going to fix it alone, right? Like they're not wholly responsible. Like as parents, we're responsible. As educators, we're responsible. We need the buy-in of our leaders in government to make sure that we can't regulate everything away, but there are some things we can do. So it's, this combination of education and parenting and regulation, and that really we need all of these kind of pieces to come together in order to really help kids have the best experiences with media.
Absolutely. And I really love what you said about there's a difference between going to some sort of social media page or any type of page and just letting the algorithm lead you versus quote unquote reading the newspaper. Like if you go to the AP site or the NPR site or the whatever site and you just are reading all the headlines, that's absolutely going to inform you about things that you never would have sought out on your own necessarily. But, being sure to explain to kids about these algorithms and how if they like a certain thing, it's just going to lead them to more of the same thing. And, like I always tell my kids, if they're watching YouTube, they have to go to channels that we have decided as a family are safe and okay. I was like, do not click on the next one that it suggests to you, because that takes you down the rabbit hole. And that is what scares me about leading them towards inappropriate content.
I think that's part of what parents can do, right? And we always, talk a lot about how so much in media literacy is when we hear from parents, like really what they're asking about is parenting, right? Like how do you parent in this age of media? And I think, that is that parent role of like, there is some kind of regulation at home that we have to exercise based on what's right for our own families, and what's right for one family might not be right for another, and what's right for one 8-year-old might not be right for another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where it's so important that we're thinking about what do our own kids need and what is appropriate for them versus how much screen time should every kid have, because it's not going to be the same. And
Mm-hmm.
also it depends on the type of content. Like, these aren't simple questions. They're very complex. And I think it's a direct reflection of media literacy, right? Like, all content is not created equal. All kids are not created equal. Like, this is a very personalized experience, and we need to think about the media in that way.
Yeah. There's also then the whole thought of having something like Alexa in your home or ChatGPT. What should we be telling our kids about how to stay safe in terms of information that they're giving to these things that a lot of times really seem very human, like Alexa?
Mm-hmm. I think that ongoing conversations is almost as important as what you're saying to them. So this is not a one-time conversation. This is not simply, you need to, think about X, Y, and Z, and you tell them once and it's fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because at each age, and as they develop, like, their mind changes, their perspective on things changes. And so continuing to have those conversations in your home at every turn, I think, is what is most beneficial. So, if you're sitting watching, TV and a commercial comes on, it's a great time to say, like, oh, what do you think they're trying to sell us with this toy ad?
Mm-hmm.
There is something to that. And I think that when we have those ongoing conversations, even if it doesn't feel like, oh, they're really, becoming this media literate kid,
Mm-hmm.
they're hearing you. Like, I have 3 kids, and, when they were younger, it didn't always seem like they cared or that, whatever. But I have seen, as they've grown older, that all of those conversations that we've had over the years have really kind of made little inroads in their head and made them think more critically about everything they're consuming. That doesn't mean they're perfect, right? Like, kids are kids, teenagers are teenagers. But I think the more we have the conversations, the more we put that at the forefront of their minds, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah. And just, telling them, be careful what sort of information you're putting out there. You
Mm-hmm.
might be telling Alexa, but all that information gets stored somewhere. That information can get hacked eventually, and just having kids be aware of that. And I mean, how do we teach them about some of these scams that are out there without just constantly scaring them?
Yeah, I think kids are less scared than we are.
Okay.
I think as parents, we tend to be a little more scared. I think, they're, with every age, that these conversations change a little bit, right? So when they're very little, it might be something as simple as, like you're saying, like, don't share the information. Somebody could do bad things with it. It's a very basic conversation. As they continue to age, you're still having that same conversation, but you're adding more information to it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can start to say, like, here's what's going to happen, or here's a potential for something to happen. And, kids are very savvy with the internet, with things online, with digital spaces. They live and breathe these spaces, right? This is where they've created communities of friends. They see a lot of what's out there. And I have seen where kids are actually defending each other, right? And looking out for each other online. So I think they see it as just kind of part of life at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're aware that these things are happening. And so I think the more information we can give them, gives them the why behind it, right? Instead of just saying, don't do this, it's like, here's what might happen. Here's, the potential problem. As they get older, it becomes, yeah, when you're 18, you're going to want to, maybe go buy a car or do something. And if you put this information online, they could steal it, and then you might have bad credit and you won't be able to get a car, so
Mm-hmm.
make it relevant to the things that matter in their life for whatever their age is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think they also don't know X goes to Y goes to Z, and we do, and that's what freaks us out.
Yes.
All they really know is
we
X.
know too much.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like
Yes.
we've been around the block, so we're well aware of, the really dark things that can happen. And I think, kids, they know these things. They maybe don't know, the full extent of things, but I think that they're a little more savvy than sometimes we give them credit for.
Yeah. I've read in a lot of different places, most of the new guidance is no social media until at least 16. I know a lot of kids are getting on a lot sooner, but let's say if you do have a kid that's 16 and you've decided that you want them to be able to have social media, but you want to help train them while they're under your roof of how to do it responsibly, how would you personally start that conversation? And what are those training wheels for a 16-year-old if you said, okay, I'm going to let you have Facebook, I'm going to let you have, whatever it is, how would you start that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm of the mindset, and this probably comes from my background, but the earlier the better, not no training wheels type of thing, here's social media when you're 8 years old. But I think having that guided presence with parents, right? Like a lot of the platforms now have parental controls. They have a lot of things that I think parents don't realize are out there to help them monitor. And so I think as a parent, the first thing I'm going to do is look at, what does this platform have? What can I do? What can I see? Where am I seeing potential issues that I need to address with my child? Because if I have the ability to go in and see what they're doing or regulate how much time they're spending on there, or who they can add as a friend or who they cannot add as a friend, that gives me a little more peace of mind to know when I can or cannot kind of take off those training wheels. I think the companies are starting to do a little bit better at making sure parents understand that those types of things are available, because I think that 16 is a hard age, right? I don't know if you have 16-year-olds. I've had 3 so far, and that is a difficult age.
No, I'm not there yet. I've got my oldest is 9.
Yeah, they, don't always like to listen to mom and dad. And I think, they feel very grown up and very independent, and like they know a whole lot at 16. And, I think when kids are 13, which is like the current age for most platforms, they're a little more malleable for parents, that parents have more influence at that age than they do at 16. So for me, I want that kind of ability to have that little bit of control and kind of attention to my, kind of parenting rules and the things that I want to lay down, which I don't think I would necessarily have at 16. And they're a little more savvy at 16 as well. So even if I try, there's a possibility they're going to be creating accounts I don't even know about and things like that. So again, I think bringing them into an environment that's open, where I can have conversations and they're not having to go to the dark corners of the internet to do things because I've said, no, you can't do this, is really where I think the best opportunity for education is going to happen. And that's where I feel they're going to be best equipped when I do take off some training wheels slowly but surely, which, I did that with each of my kids. It's like we did lots of monitoring. We had all the settings. They couldn't, really do anything without us knowing. And they didn't love it. They complained about it, because some of their friends are just doing all the things. But that little bit of time, I think, gave us the opportunity to kind of work with them to really create good habits online and understand some of these scary bits that I know can happen that they don't yet know can happen, and kind of go through some of those things with them. So I think it's a process, right? It's not so much a one-time, here's your rules and, you must follow these. I think that it takes a lot of interaction from parents to prepare kids. And, and unfortunately, some kids don't have that kind of parenting in their life. And I think that's where, we see some trouble. And so I think that's where, anything we can do from an education standpoint is really helpful, because not everybody has the same kind of support system at home. Yeah. Which we see that in a lot of areas at school too, right? So it's just one more area that we probably have to shore up a little bit.
That's really interesting about the ages. Thank you for the hot tip. Now, if you're starting a kid a lot younger, say 13, would you say maybe do some quote unquote lessons, like I sit there with my social media and show them and they don't even have their own account yet? Or would you let them have their own account, but just lots of parental controls?
Yeah, I do. We always did. They have their own account. Not, we did not. I know a lot of parents allow their kids to go on social media before the legal age for that platform. We did not do that. I tend to just, oh, sorry, that's the rule. I must follow it. Blame it on somebody else, not me, But I think having the ability to walk through them with the platform, I also don't think every platform is for 13-year-olds, right? Like I was not a big fan of things like Snapchat when the messages could disappear and I couldn't, I had so little control. So we did regulate which platforms and, the ones that gave us a little more control, we were able, felt more comfortable with that. So I think and again, it depends on the kid too, right? Like some kids are risk takers and they're very adventurous and they want to do all the things and they might need some more support and monitoring than a kid who's a rule follower and who's going to do all the things you say all the time. And, I've got 3 different kids who have 3 very different personalities and I had to manage social media with each of them in very different ways. My youngest is, the rule follower of the family and, he's probably had the most freedom, but he's also been around these conversations since my oldest got them. And so he's, really had a lot of we always like to say he learned from the experiences of his older siblings because he was always within earshot of any conversations we were having. So I do think that ongoing conversations again is where that comes into play as being really helpful, and even starting to talk about it even before they're on social media. And that's when I think you can say, look at, this is my account, or share things with them like, oh, like, look at this funny TikTok I saw, and like talk about how, algorithms, like my kids make fun of me because my TikTok feed is babies and dogs and, media and things like that. And I'm like, that's my interest. That's what I like. My sister's is sourdough because she's in her sourdough era right now. So, I think helping them understand how these things work is really important, how the platforms work, how the algorithms work. And those are conversations you don't have to wait to have until they're on social media. You can have those long before.
That could be kind of a cool game of like, hey, look, guys, my algorithm is all dogs and babies. Yeah. And then maybe like search something just completely random about like mountain climbing and just say, guys, check this out. Within 2 minutes, it started showing me stuff about mountain climbing and hiking and what gloves I should buy, and just show them it's going to change depending on what you search out, what you like, what you click. Like that would actually be kind of a fun game. And like, I kind of want to go and do that on my own and just see like how fast would it switch and change the algorithm depending on what I press on.
I call that ruining my algorithm.
Right. Yeah. Now I'm going to get all sorts of junk
like,
that
I'm
I don't.
not clicking on that because all I'm going to see is that for the next 3 days.
Right. Exactly. Then how long does it take to get back to what you want?
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to Namely, I noticed you guys have something called U.S. Media Literacy Week. What is that?
We do. So we started U.S. Media Literacy Week. Actually, this will be our 11th. So 10 years ago, last October, we had our first U.S. Media Literacy Week, and it was actually is still part of UNESCO's Media and Information Literacy Week, which is a global event. And actually, I think there's this 10 days, but Canada has U.S. Media Literacy Week. We have U.S. Media Literacy, or Canada has Canadian Media Literacy Week. We have U.S. There's a couple of other countries that participate as well. So it's more of a global kind of effort to shine a spotlight on media literacy. But really, it's more of, for us, for Namely, it is more of a public-facing event for us. So we do a lot with teachers. We have our conference, which is largely professional development for educators. We have a lot of resources. We do some stuff with our corporate partners around parenting and things like that. But this is really kind of a week that we set aside to say, here is the week to find a way to practice media literacy in some way during the week. So if you're a parent, it might be having a conversation with your kids or talking to your teacher about whether or not they're doing media literacy in their classroom or what they need to do media literacy, because we know a lot of teachers don't get professional development for it. We know there is no national focus on it. There has been some legislation that has passed in many states, but it's usually unfunded. So it doesn't have a whole lot of teeth. So this is really a way to say, if I'm a teacher, I'm going to do a lesson in my classroom, or if I'm at a university, I might host a screening and, have a conversation afterwards of a movie. I might release a resource. And so we have 4 different levels of participation. You can be a supporter, which is really just sharing out about media literacy. So maybe sharing something we post on social media, writing something on your own social media account about media literacy to help build awareness. You can be a creator, and that is someone who's like putting out a lesson plan or an infographic, or maybe they have a curriculum, that they offer. And so really just kind of putting the content out there for people to use during that week. You can also be an organizer, which is someone who's hosting an event. So that might be like the screening of a movie. It might be having a roundtable conversation. It might be, having a something in your school, that's school-wide. And then there's also educators. So if you're a teacher, it's committing to do like a lesson that week, or something within your classroom with students around education and media literacy. And, it could even be librarians. It can be community organizers. That's not kind of a closed anything. It's like all hands on deck. You come, you do it. If it's your first media literacy lesson, great. If it's your 800th, perfect. Like it's just about really setting that time aside during the year to practice that. So that is kind of our big kind of, public facing, really awareness building event each year. And it happens in October, usually around the last week or so.
Okay. And are you saying, was there also a conference that's associated with that, or is that separate? Or
that is separate. We do a conference in July, which is largely professional development for educators. We have teacher scholarships, especially now because we know that teachers are, losing funding. We know that, media literacy can be a little controversial with the, media in the title. If people don't know what it means, they might be like, oh, it's the media, we're like, no, that's not what we do.
Right.
We're often asked like, well, the journalists you work with, we're like, no, we're educators, not journalists.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So that's really kind of our core professional development activity. But we also have a National Media Literacy Alliance that we host. And so that is 12 of the professional teacher organizations. And it's called the National Media Literacy Alliance. It's like, science and social studies and English and mathematics and journalism and libraries. It's like ALA and the American Library Association and National Council of Teachers of Mathematics and NCSS, the National Council of Social Studies. And so all of these major teaching organizations have come together to have this alliance to say that media literacy is important and should be embedded across the curriculums in all subject areas.
So if somebody wants to do a class or, something like that, they can come to you guys for resources. Do you actually have like curriculum, or it's mostly resources and ideas?
Yeah, so we don't do curriculums ourselves. We're kind of the national umbrella organization. So we have about 65 organizational partners that are under our umbrella. And those are all organizations that are doing curriculums that are specific to their area of expertise. So we have, I'm sure you've heard of like Common Sense or News Literacy Project. They have things that they do. We've also got an organization called Project Look Sharp that does amazing tutorials on how to use their curriculums. And I think I just read that they just passed 900 different lessons that they have available, and it's across a lot of different subject areas. So we really like curate, we bring together the community, we do some trainings. And then really it's about the advocacy piece as well, little a advocacy, and just bringing awareness to it. And thinking about what does our community need in order to be supported in delivering what they need in the classroom or in their libraries or in their communities. And so we really act as that kind of support structure.
Very cool. What was that called? Look Sharp?
Project Look Sharp. They're out of Ithaca, New York.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, lots and lots of lessons there.
And then what is your youth advisory council, and how can kids get involved, and what ages is that?
Yeah, so we have our youth advisory council. We're in year 2 of our council, which is very exciting. And so it is made up of high school and college students. And we usually do a call for the next cohort around September or so. And so they work on specific projects that they're interested in around media literacy. And so they, like right now, we're in the process of releasing a series of videos that they created about media literacy. And so it's really just kind of giving them the power and the voice to do what they feel like youth need in the media literacy space. Most of them are very interested in media literacy, and they use it in order to have kind of this, it's a great kind of experience building, piece for their resume, whether they're in college, looking to in the workforce or in high school, applying for colleges. But it really gives them the opportunity to kind of step into the leadership space in media literacy and kind of help direct what youth need rather than us deciding like, here's what youth want to see.
Yeah.
They really take the reins.
That's cool.
And say, here's what we're thinking about. Here's why you think this is important. And here's what we think other youth need to know if they don't yet know about media literacy.
I love that. If people want to get more information in general, how's the best way to get in contact with Namely?
Yeah, so you can either visit our website, which is www.namely.org. That's NAMLE. And we have tons of resources on there. You can email us at namely@namely.org. And we've got a very small but mighty staff, and we have tons of experts in our community. So even if we can't answer your question, we can usually find someone who can.
Oh, super. One last thing that I like to ask everyone, because part of this whole screen less, play more philosophy is that kids really these days need to get more independence, more freedom, more responsibility. And so I'm wondering if you're willing to share a memory, something that pops up in your head of a time when you were a kid that you got to be totally independent. Like maybe you were with a bunch of friends and no adults around, or maybe you were by yourself and you just got to do whatever that was by yourself without grown-ups around. And what was it?
Well, I will say I grew up on a lake.
Okay.
Not as fancy as it sounds, but grew up on a lake outside of, in a suburb of Chicago. And my best friend and I used to take my dad's canoe out and go out into the middle of the lake and go down all the little, side parts. And we used to get out in the middle of the lake on the sandbar, which was probably not a great idea, and sink into our knees and muck and, but we would go explore all the different parts of the lake. Nobody knew where we were, could not have gotten a hold of us if they wanted to. And luckily nothing ever happened because they wouldn't have known where to find us. But that was certainly something we did frequently.
Fun. How old do you think you were?
Oh gosh, we probably started doing that when we were 10.
Okay. Yeah. And I assume no life jackets?
Probably not. I don't recall ever having them. Maybe we threw them in the boat, but we certainly weren't wearing them. That's for sure.
Oh, that's so fun. So you just do that on like a summer day, or was it just kind of after school?
In our summers, it's like get out of the house. And so we would, it's like, well, what can we do? If we were not riding our bikes, we were, probably out on a canoe in the winter. We'd, my brother would take us on the snowmobiles and we'd just follow trails endlessly. So. Oh,
that sounds so fun. Oh, well, thank you so very much. Lots of really, really good info to think about. So,
thank you so much for having me. This was lovely.
Absolutely. And now people know how to get in contact with you guys. And thank you. Special thanks to Neil Penninger, who composed our theme music. Please join us at screenlessplaymore.com for ideas on how to get your kids outside, away from screens, and enjoying independent play. We also have book reviews, screen-free toy and gift ideas, and so much more.